Welcome to the Big Calm podcast. I'm Tara Palmer, the founder of Big Calm. I'm a marriage and family therapist with over 15 years in private practice and a lot of experience helping a variety of people with emotional and relational challenges. While that experience is important and helpful in shaping the ideas we'll talk about here on the show, it is my work of learning to mindfully operate my own nervous system that will make your time listening to me and the Big Calm team relatable. Whether you find yourself stuck in the same old frustrating patterns, unable to keep your calm, or just wishing certain parts of your life could be better, we've got some great stuff for you. Each episode contains good, everyday nervous system informed material that can make all the difference. Thanks for being here with us.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Big Calm podcast where we have conversations about the nervous system and emotional well-being. I'm Scott, your guest host. I'm here with Tara Palmer, who will be your host from episode to episode. Tara is a psychotherapist and also the head coach at Big Calm, where we focus on nervous system well-being. I'm going to turn it over to Tara to kind of introduce the podcast concept, and then we'll have a conversation about some specifics that'll help you on your journey to greater well-being. Welcome, Tara, and could you talk a little bit about the podcast and what we're trying to do here?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think a lot of what we're really hoping to do on this podcast is create a really relatable experience. Just over time, we'll end up talking through a lot of different everyday types of scenarios that people deal with, where they might be kind of struggling with different challenges that are producing anxiety or overwhelm or different things like that. But maybe before we get into too much of that, I just had a story run through my mind earlier this morning that felt like it kind of captured the essence of maybe more the energy or the vibe, I guess, if you will, of what we hope to produce amongst the Big Calm community. And that was just related to going out to lunch the other day with my friend Suzanne. And we just, we're kind of sitting at this great restaurant in St. Paul. It's called A-Side Public House, and just really awesome food and good conversation, and just able to kind of like spend a few hours with each other talking through, all different parts of life. And as we were paying our bill and just kind of wrapping up our time together, the waitress had commented, like, oh, it was just so sweet to kind of watch the two of you chat and see, people connecting. We used to see that a lot more. And it feels like these days, a lot of people are just kind of like popping in and popping out, and everybody seems to be in such a hurry. And so it was just kind of a treat for me as your waitress to just be able to observe the interaction between the two of you. And so as I was thinking about that and just kind of recalling her comment, and just aware of how much everybody is kind of on the go these days and not able to slow down, or not choosing to slow down. I guess it's probably a matter of perspective there. But I was thinking of how important it is to me that this platform become a place where everybody can just kind of feel I guess kind of that slowdown, that place to just sit back and kind of take in some information and, maybe hear the Big Calm team and other, maybe guest speakers over time talking about these things that we're all encountering, and maybe some of the quality of life type of stuff that's being lost to so many of us when we don't have these spaces where we can kind of bring ourselves into calmer energies and connect with each other and reflect on maybe some of the other things that are happening that are getting in our way of having that. So I would say that's really going to characterize a lot of what we're doing here, is having these deep, meaningful conversations, and conversations that are going to really relate to our listeners and what they're going through in their day-to-day lives.
Great. Thanks for that intro. And when you talk about the conversations, we're also talking about like nervous system and mental health and emotional well-being. And so there's a certain focus or theme to those conversations. Could you talk a little bit about kind of that theme and how the nervous system relates to the pace of life and how we relate to one another and some of these big things that we want to dig into?
Yeah, I mean, I think the topics are going to really vary greatly across time, but a lot of the types of things that I imagine we'll be discussing are, like if I were to just rattle off a few different ideas, that might be, reactive moments that we experience in parenting, or how do we maintain a sense of like deeper purpose in ourselves when our world is moving so fast around us and there's just too many demands to maybe even care sometimes. Or how do I deal with a difficult boss? Maybe somebody who's a little bit on the aggressive side and not understanding where I'm coming from as an employee. So there's kind of all these everyday events that people experience, our team included, where the nervous system just has a lot to do with how we're responding to those experiences around us. And when we don't have some of that, I don't know if I want to call it basic information about the nervous system, but maybe a little bit, that we're really at a huge disadvantage in terms of not understanding what's going on inside of us or why we're responding to, our environment in the ways that we are. And without having that understanding, again, we're just at a huge disadvantage in terms of being able to make adjustments. We don't understand what we have control over. So, to a certain degree, I guess kind of default settings in our nervous system can end up running our lives more than we are, if we're not building that kind of awareness.
So one of the big ideas is this nervous system is kind of operating always in the background, kind of just beneath the surface, and it's there all the time, but we're not aware necessarily, or many of us aren't aware that it's there. And that lack of awareness, in addition to it being there, is a big problem for a lot of people that prevents them from kind of finding that sense of well-being and purpose and relational security and connection that they want with spouses or kids. Or is that kind of one of the big ideas?
Yeah, I think you're really hitting, some key understandings there. So the fancy term for kind of what you're talking about, that behind the scenes functioning of the nervous system, is called neuroception. And so kind of what's happening at the level of our nervous system is that it is always running behind the scenes. It functions as more or less a surveillance system for our safety and well-being. And so it is always operating outside of our consciousness, and it's just making snap judgments in the moment about how safe or not safe we are in different environments. And so that works really great, a lot of the time. And then there's other times where our nervous systems can get kind of patterned for, just a whole variety of reasons towards being more on edge, towards maybe reading into situations where something isn't as dangerous as the nervous system is perceiving it or neurocepting it as being. And those are the places where we just really end up with kind of a mismatch between what's actually going on in our environment and what our nervous system thinks is going on in our environment. And we find ourselves, either underreacting or overreacting to different situations in our lives. And so it's that mismatch, I guess, that we end up spending a lot of time talking about in our key courses at Big Calm, kind of building some understanding about why that exists, and then what do we do about it.
Yeah, so that makes sense. So if I'm listening though, and I think like, oh, I've got a good handle on this. I do some meditation. I try and pace myself and not cram too much into life. I maybe go to therapy, do breath work. I do things um, to try and balance that stuff out. Is there anything wrong with that, or if there's nothing wrong with it, why isn't it good enough for some people?
I would really say for some people that maybe is good enough. They maybe do have kind of a really solid balance in their system. They don't feel like they're overreacting or underreacting to a lot of different experiences happening in their lives. And so, kind of the if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of mindset, I guess, is the things that we're offering. Maybe there are people out there who have kind of found their way into this knowledge base and understanding. Um, some of what you're talking about there, though, is maybe kind of more maintenance practices that are a part of keeping our nervous system in good condition. And we might be doing those things, and they might be, like I would argue that they're always going to be helpful to us. But then we might be plugging along through our life and finding that there's certain things that can just set us off. And so no amount of meditation, no amount of yoga, no amount of healthy eating seems to kind of quite be getting at the area that's kind of getting activated in our nervous system. And so, for some people that might be being in a social experience. And so they're just going into new places around new people, and they find, they try to meditate ahead of time. They try to do these different things. They try to have all this positive self-talk. And yet they go in, and man, their nervous system just starts going to town on them. And essentially the nervous system starts to perceive, all the people in the environment as dangerous. So the nervous system is going into that patterning of protecting itself, or helping to protect the person. And when we are trying to build new social connections, that's not a very useful physiological state for us to be in. Our nervous system is pulling us back. Our body's even going to be sending cues to the people around us, maybe that we're not so open to connection. And so there's just a lot of different things that can go on that start to get in our way. And then there's, a lot of maybe how we've grown up, these different patterns that kind of get wired into our system, so to speak, that come online kind of again unconsciously, and they're getting in our way. So I don't know if that quite answers the question. Feel free to ask more.
No, that's great. And then it's part of what you're saying then that there's this, you called it the physiology. So like people might be familiar with like fight or flight. That's what you're getting at, right? So you've got some of this
Yep.
fight or flight energy going on. And so you got this tension, you got this battle with your body doing this fight or flight thing, and then you got maybe your mind or your willpower saying, "Hey, this isn't so bad. I should be okay, and I can just get through this meeting or this party or this presentation or this family gathering, and like I should be able to do that if I can summon enough energy, willpower,
Yeah.
grit, whatever." And you're saying that's a losing battle.
I would say it's an unfortunate one to continue with. um, and so what a lot of us, I would say, have kind of learned how to do is, with different cognitive strategies, with a variety of things, we kind of have these ideas that we have to override what's happening in our system. And so then, again, my nervous system, I'll stay with this scenario where I'm, maybe going to a party and trying to meet some new people, and my nervous system says, this is just not, this isn't safe. And so I can tell myself all day long, yes, it is, it's going to be okay, and all those kinds of things. But if my nervous system is running on high, I'm going to be feeling that mismatch. And it's that mismatch that's going to continue to make that a relatively to rather kind of miserable experience for me. And so that's the piece that we really want to be helping people with, is noticing when those mismatches are present, and then how do we access change at a deeper level, that's a more transformative change, so that the nervous system starts to know I'm safe. And so if our nervous system doesn't know we're safe, there's really not going to be enjoyment in the experience of connecting. So we can try to force the issue, but there's not going to be a more natural Oh, it's just so nice to be here and meeting you, and all of those things that would maybe kind of just naturally open up in terms of our curiosity about somebody or sharing things that are meaningful to us. It's just all going to tend to be more collapsed or shut down if our nervous system isn't in agreement with whatever it is we're telling ourselves.
So does this tap into, I hear a lot about like Brene Brown talks about shame, and other people talk about guilt, or other, like, are these things connected? Are they different? How do things like the nervous system and some of these struggles relate to things like shame?
Yeah, I guess I would say the nervous system has a whole lot to do with shame. And it's really beautiful how many providers are out there talking about these things. I think everybody has their own language for some of this stuff. And maybe the nervous system is something that we all have in common. So that's part of I guess, the beauty that I find in speaking the language of the nervous system. Even in our group of providers at Big Calm, we all kind of come from some different backgrounds. Our trainings are unique in terms of healing modalities and those things. And there's places where our language naturally syncs up. And then there's places where we're maybe talking about really similar concepts, but just from slightly different language bases or slightly different conceptualizations. So um, I would tend to say, that shame is just one state. It's just a state that our systems can find itself in. Oftentimes, if we're um, fearful that there's something inherently bad about us that's going to have us ostracized from community in some kind of way. And so it's that difference that Brene Brown talks about in terms of what is the difference between guilt and shame, and that whole idea that guilt is it essentially tells me that I've done something, I don't know if I like the word bad, but not particularly helpful to me, versus shame would tell me that I am bad, that I'm kind of inherently flawed. There's something wrong with me, and maybe uniquely wrong with me. And so it starts to create that sense of like maybe not being worthy of connection and some of those things. And so the way the nervous system is processing different events is going to have a lot to do with what states we find ourselves in.
And so the nervous system, to pick up on that, is kind of at the core of this, you're saying, and there's different ways to kind of tap into the nervous system, and then different ways that issues with like imbalance play out between the nervous system and the real world. And one of those could be shame, but it could have different flavors, right? It could be different things for different people.
Absolutely. And so, there's three key parts of the nervous system. We base a lot of our conversation of the nervous system at Big Calm kind of on the polyvagal theory. And so, according to that theory, there's again three layers of the nervous system. And so, in the um, first part of the nervous system that kind of evolved across human history, there's this part of the nervous system that when I'm in danger, it's going to go into a kind of a collapse state. It's gonna play dead, essentially. And so our systems can find if our nervous system, so I'm gonna go back to that word earlier of neuroception. If it neuroceps, or it kind of unconsciously detects some form of threat, it's possible that our nervous system will go into a pattern that's more of a collapsed energy in order to try to take care of us. Um, and then there's the sympathetic part of the nervous system. This is the fight or flight part of the nervous system, and probably one that most of us are more familiar with. And so that's kind of the idea that if something is threatening to me, I'm going to find myself having, maybe a fight, a flight, a freeze, or maybe a less known response would be called a fawn response. And the fawn response is when I am in the face of threat, and maybe in like a predator type scenario, I'm going to start trying to appease somebody. I'm going to just try to go along to get along. And so if I'm in that sympathetic part of my nervous system, and I'm feeling threatened in some way, I'm going to go into a pattern that involves those types of energies. which pattern is going to be maybe more so unique to each individual. And so some people have a little bit stronger tendencies towards a fight response. Some people have a little bit stronger tendencies toward a flight response. We all have a little bit of everything. So there's going to be variation, but definitely you can see some people moving more strongly into certain patterning. And then there's the ventral system, which is really kind of our goal, is to try to help bring people into ventral states, which are the safe and connected states in our nervous system. And so when I know at the level of my nervous system that I'm safe, then I become open to connecting with people in the world around me and even myself. So if I'm in danger, I'm not connecting deeply to some inner knowing that exists within myself even.
That makes sense. I wanted to switch gears just a little bit, and so you're a therapist. You've been in private practice for what 15 years or more, and spent a lot of time with a lot of people, kind of one on one. And obviously, there's lots of other therapists and psychologists that are trying to help people with things like anxiety and depression and feeling overwhelmed or inadequate. Why this focus on the nervous system? Why this focus on Big Calm instead of just keep doing what you're doing in the private practice and kind of letting that take care of things?
Yeah, I guess a huge motivator for me in that area is recognizing, I think, just kind of like through my own journey, through my work as a therapist, just like how much time it can take to kind of put different pieces together, trying to sort out, why am I stuck? What contributes to me being stuck? What do I do about it? That we can just spend a lot of time and money and energy kind of try to put that, I guess, puzzle of well-being together. And so to the degree that I can help people kind of put some of those key pieces of the puzzle together a little bit faster so that they've got at least a working knowledge, and not just an intellectual knowledge, but kind of an experience-based knowledge. How do I take this information, apply it back to myself, and have a felt sense in my body related to these things that I'm learning? I really believe that people are going to have kind of a jump start to how do they continue working with the struggles that they're personally encountering, their personal stuck spots, and what different services, I guess, even if they want to continue receiving support, what services are going to work best in relation to what they're discovering about their own nervous system, their own history, the things that their mind body system holds.
So, anxiety, to use a specific example, is really, really common. And there's so many people that deal with that take medication for that it controls parts of their lives to different degrees. What's maybe different with what you're advocating for on the Big Calm platform and kind of your approach as opposed to someone who comes in with, say, kind of a moderate level of anxiety and walks into sort of any therapist or psychologist office in the country? What would be different for that person going through that journey?
Yeah, I guess, that's a hard question to answer in the sense that there's such a variety of providers across the country. And so some therapists out there are maybe doing some of what we're going to be looking at doing as well. But a part of what we really want to offer people is that understanding of like, what is happening inside of me? Where is this anxiety originating from? Because a lot of times what happens is if I don't understand what's happening inside of me, it gets easy for me to become anxious about the anxiety, if that makes any sense. Versus when I understand what's happening, it's kind of like, oh, now all of a sudden I'm in a position to just maybe observe what's happening, to notice what's happening. And then, a huge part of what we also want to be doing is help people know how to shift different energies in their nervous system into those places where they're feeling more resourced. And so, do we imagine that we're going to, like be a cure all for somebody with more severe anxiety? I think it's just way too complex of a consideration. And I do think that people who are struggling with anxiety will benefit from being able to learn how to moderate those energies in their system. And then there's other things that we're also going to be doing that are hopefully more transformative in nature, looking at what else might be contributing, what are some underlying functions in their nervous system. So I guess that's a little fuzzy the way I'm stating that. Maybe if I go back to that example I was using earlier, somebody wants to go to a party, and maybe their early years, they faced a lot of bullying in school. They didn't have the social, or not the social, but the maybe emotional support at home or the guidance to be able to kind of sort out what to do with all of those things. And a part of what got kind of stuck in their system is this unconscious belief and this pattern that, people are threats. And so then they're going out into the world. They've got this diagnosis of anxiety. There's some of those parts of their history that they might kind of have a general sense of, like, yeah, I don't know, the bullying probably factored in somehow, but I think I'm just an anxious person. It's just kind of who I am or how I am. And so that ability to maybe kind of distance themselves from the energies, from the pattern that's coming up, and maybe kind of notice um, that isn't who they are. It's just a pattern. It's just a program. It's just like kind of another language for it would be an implicit learning. It's again more that unconscious type of learning that their nervous system is carrying, and it's kicking in ways that are maybe no longer useful based on what's become possible in their life as adults.
And then with our listeners, and then someone who would choose to engage with the Big Calm program, in practical terms, they would what? They would get coaching or training or worksheets, or like what would they get that would be different, and how are you advocating for moving people forward?
Yeah, I mean our core course, I guess, that we're encouraging people to participate in is going to include some of this key information that I'm talking about, of just like, how do these things get set up in our nervous system? How does the nervous system operate? What do I do with shifting these energies in my system? And then eventually we get into some of this more transformational work associated with kind of addressing the specific patterns or programs, if you will, that are kind of installed at that unconscious level in an individual's nervous system. Um, so as we're going through that course, we're offering people some, just really good psychoeducation material, what is happening. And then we're also helping them do a lot of reflection exercises and tying that back to the specifics in their own system. We're doing work with regulating exercises and kind of introducing how do we shift those energies in our system. And then ultimately, we're dropping into that more transformational work related to a specific program. So people get that experience of what it's like to walk through creating a more profound shift around a stuck area in their life.
So I've gone through the program, so I could answer this in part, but I'd want to
Mm-hmm.
maybe I'll push it back to you for a better answer. But when I hear you say things like energies and moving these things around, I immediately have a little bit of a reaction as someone who doesn't necessarily relate to universal mystical kind of stuff. I tend to be a very intellectual type person, and I think there tends to be maybe a split between guy and girl that way too, where maybe women tend to be maybe a little bit more open to that, and guys tend to be a little bit more, cut and dry and practical. To use a big generalization,
Sure.
of course, but could you, like, what does energies mean when you say
Sure,
things like
sure.
that?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like, if I'm a normal guy going through life, why should I give a damn about energies?
Energies. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so no, it's a really good this is an interesting piece that you're kind of bringing up, because I think all of us providers we get into our I don't know whether we want to call it psychobabble or like our professional jargon, and we don't even realize how foreign we sound to people who don't naturally speak our language. So it's a great question. I guess when I'm referring to energies, I'm referring to the different states that take place in our nervous system. And so, and that's produced, it's again, very complex. I'm not going to get into all the sciencey descriptions of it here, but the senses that are taking place in our body system. And so our system is set up to read our environment through the senses, and then produce, again, like at the level of the nervous system, these different energies that are about keeping us aware of what's happening in our environment. So, again, that's happening through the senses, and then prepared to respond to whether we're in safe or dangerous situations. And so that's a very simplified description of it, but I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at.
And so these things, these states or these energy, these would apply to anyone, even someone like me that was formerly in the military and considers himself fairly tough. It's not a tough or a weak thing. It's not a smart or a not smart willpower thing. It just is, right.
It's
It's just
just a
there.
human thing.
It's a
It's
human
just a
thing.
human thing. And then what states your system has been programmed, so to speak, into might have a lot to do with some of that history. So somebody who's got a background in military has maybe um, learned almost to disconnect from some of that awareness in order to do like an override. Like, I don't have room to think about or respond to some of these states that are coming up in my system, so I might learn to kind of push them outside of my awareness. And I'm doing kind of an override. And so I think in a different way, you were talking about in maybe that social anxiety context that I keep referring back to, someone may tell themselves, I'm okay, I'm safe, I'm all of those things, but they're really kind of doing that state override. Um, and so in your system, you might find yourself, if you learned how to disregard certain sensory experience in order to just kind of like be tough to handle the moment, to what have you, like that's just, again, it's another function of your nervous system where I'm going to go numb to some of those things, even in more extreme danger situations, so that I can finish protecting myself.
And I think we're going to talk about this in a future episode, but just in real brief terms, why isn't it a good strategy just to set that aside and kind of disregard and go numb and just kind of, if I don't know about it or think about it, it won't bother me or affect me.
Yeah.
Isn't that a perfectly good strategy?
It's not only a perfectly good strategy, it's an essential strategy in the right context. And so if I'm a soldier in war and it is just time to, protect myself and deal with the mission at hand, I don't really have room to sit back and notice that I feel a little scared or maybe sad or some of those other, maybe, I guess I'm going to keep coming back to my word energy, but those softer emotions or energies passing through our system. Um, and when I have maybe come back home and I am settling into civilian life and I don't have those life threatening experiences taking place anymore, then the ability to be with some of those softer energies becomes imperative, really, to maintaining my well being, because all of those things are cues in the body that are helping me know what my needs are. They're helping me know how to connect with other people and the world around me. They're not helping me know how to be relevant to some of those internal experiences that other people are having too. And so we can end up storing a lot of unnecessary stress, really, when we're just constantly doing that override.
So it's not just about adapting and overcoming. It's about being flexible and knowing sort of what strategies and techniques and thinking to apply at a given point in time, kind of given how safe the environment is, where I'm at, all of those things.
Yeah, I guess the word we use in our compass course is this idea of context, that context is everything. And so our nervous systems don't always, when something's been patterned in strongly enough and it's associated with a perception that we are in danger, our nervous system doesn't always do a great job of reading the new context. And so we can stay stuck in old protective patterns that are not useful to us in our new context. So, an example, like something really simple and maybe yeah, I'll just go with really simple. Might be, if I'm sitting in my office with a client and in the waiting room, something drops. We hear a great big thud. And some people's nervous systems, their patterns just say, like, oh, I wonder what was that. And then we might, crack open the door, and our nervous systems are pretty moderated. We're not feeling, like we're in a life threatening situation. But for somebody who has, a different kind of history, what unconscious meaning gets associated with that loud sound might be very different. And so then their system is going to maybe pull up this response of feeling terrified. Um, and then we crack open the door and we discover it was just a book that fell off of a shelf. It really wasn't a big deal. But their nervous system just read it according to what its history tells them is likely going on. So I don't know if that gets to the answer to your question, but
Yeah, and I think that also opens up the idea that different people, depending on their background, when placed in the exact same context, same circumstances, are going to sometimes respond very, very differently. And
yep,
that makes a ton of sense given that history.
absolutely. Yep.
So I wanted to close with just some practical tips. So I know a lot of folks listening are probably, tuned in part because they've or maybe thinking or feeling like they have a dysregulated nervous system and are looking to learn a little bit more about that and how paying attention to that might help them, lead a better life. Could you maybe provide just a couple of examples of like really practical things that people could do, sort of between episodes to help keep their nervous system kind of regulated, or things that they could pay attention to, just something to start people off, some real practical things that they can take away?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I were to start everyone off with something um foundational, it's really just starting to pay attention. Um, and so you had touched on some of the like meditation, yoga, different things that people can do, and all of that's fantastic as well. And I'll get into the reasons why about that in future episodes. But really, until we notice what's going on, we're going to have a harder time shifting. And a lot of times, we um, might again have learned to just kind of disregard, or we don't completely pick up on these different states that are happening inside of us all day, every day. We might do a lot of that overriding that we've been talking about. And then the other thing that happens is a lot of times they might notice on a certain level, but rather than sitting back and just kind of observing and having like, I wonder what that's about, or I wonder what's happening inside of me right now. I wonder what my nervous system thinks is happening. And being able to start recognizing that there might be that mismatch that we've been referencing going on, they start judging themselves. And so instead of having that, like, um, oh gosh, what is this kind of curiosity? They're maybe jumping more into like, what is wrong with me? Why am I always reacting this way? Why can't I just chill out? Why can't I, whatever it might be? And so now, not always, but often the nervous system is going to be getting more activated because now we're layering in that additional pressure energy to be somewhere that we're not. And so I think a lot starts with just kind of being able to be present with ourselves as a compassionate observer, just learning how to listen inside.
Well, thank you, Tara. Really appreciate the conversation. With that, we will wrap it up. Next week, we're going to be talking about, or next episode, we're going to be talking about a little bit more about the nervous system and what it is and how it impacts mental and emotional health. I'd encourage you all to please subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And we will see you all again soon. Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye.
This podcast represents the opinions of Big Calm and our guests. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on our podcast does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Podcast content should not be taken as medical advice. All content is for informational purposes only. Please consult your healthcare professional with any medical questions. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient or therapist-patient relationship. Privacy is of utmost importance to us. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect confidentiality. This podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast. The contents of our podcast and related show notes are all copyrighted content owned by Big Calm LLC. All podcasts and show notes that are distributed to the public for free can be redistributed via hard copy or electronic copy for free, only if Big Calm LLC is included as the acknowledged author within the actual media that is redistributed. This podcast is owned by Big Calm LLC.